Hey everyone, Rita McGrath here. Thank you so much for joining in this LinkedIn Live session where my guest is Tony O'Driscoll, who is an adjunct professor at the Fuqua School of Business at Duke and also teaches in the Pratt School of Engineering there. And what we're going to talk about for the next half hour or so is his fabulous new book, Everyday Superhero. And what I love about this book is it's very empowering to people who are not them. I work with companies a lot, and it's always, if only they would, if only they could, if only they made the right decision. And what Tony's book is about is regular people who are able to take action on things that they see happening in their organizations. So we're going to bring him on. We're going to ask him about the book and about the framework that the book is teaching us. So hello, Tony.
Rita, so good to be here. Good to see you.
Thank you so much for agreeing to do this. It's such a pleasure.
Always a pleasure, Rita.
Absolutely. So Tony and I go way back and in sort of circles of Drucker forums and other kinds of fora where we get together. But this new book is really kind of unusual because, first of all, it's not a text. It's a visual book. And it tells a visual story about May, who's your protagonist, and her journey through the world of performing in organizations. And so let me just start off by asking you, what made you decide to produce it in that way?
Yeah, well, that has to go down to Martina O'Sullivan, the publisher and the editor. So Martina's with Random House. And in fact, this goes to Drucker, Rita. I was doing in fact, you might have been there where we were doing a panel, and then I talked about the PCT framework, People-Centered Transformation Framework, and Martina heard about it and said, I think there could be a book here. And I said, great, I've already done all the research and got all the references and so on and so forth, so let's turn it into a standard 12-chapter book. And as we started working through the document, she said, your whole message is that this is about people and people-centered transformation. I think you need to make it a visual narrative. And my response at that time, Rita, was, a visual what? And she said, a cartoon. And I said, hold on a sec. Like, this is a completely different and radical departure from just taking, your traditional research and turning it into your book. But thankfully, I had a very good friend who might even be on here today, Gary Zamchik, who has a wonderful way of turning words into images that resonate with people. And so I said, hey, I have a friend. And once Gary started putting some images and characters together in a very, very, prototype format, if you want to call it that, she was like, yeah, this is it. We need to do it.
I love it. It's very accessible and it's really fun to read. I mean, I got through it pretty quickly.
Right. The irony is it's the Mark Twain thing, right? Sorry, I wrote you such a long letter. I didn't have time to write a short, tight. The idea was 60 to 90 minutes that you could get through. That was very, very tight because we're trying to honor all the research that went into the framework and get that into the story. And to be honest, we had to leave a fair amount out. I now understand, Rita, why when you watch a movie and they have a complex character that's three people, and I'm going, oh, that's inauthentic. From a narrative perspective, I understand. Well, they had to like condense these three characters into one character because the movie can only last 2 hours. So I've grown to appreciate that a lot.
I bet. Yeah. Well, it's a really engrossing read, and it tells the story of the forces in organizations that get in the way of high performance, and that lead to people doing politics, and that lead to all kinds of nasty things. And right in the front of the book, you've got this sets of cast of characters.
Yeah.
You've got villains, you've got heroes. It's wonderful.
Right. Yeah, the characters, I mean, that was the whole thing. So Gary gets the credit on that. He knows a whole lot about how to set these things up. And with the characters, every character, there's a lot of this is built on Joseph Campbell. So I learned a whole lot about Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey. But I learned even more from Gary, where he was talking about, when someone's writing a story, in the third part of the story, right, in the meeting the mentor or whatever, if there's a gun above the fireplace, the gun is above the fireplace for a reason, because it has to show up in the story later. Everything has to, you know what I mean? That's kind of a device. They call it a motif. And I knew nothing about this, Rita, right? So just a babe in the woods. But then you start to learn. So I would say in the beginning, there were the characters, and he said, I think it needs to be female. I think her name should be Maybe. Even the names mean something, this book is full of Easter eggs, and we can get into in a little bit. And then her sidekick, you always have to have a sidekick. That's practical. He's practical. And then Reason is the voice of reason, and Sapien is the head of HR. And so those are kind of the They're the superhero characters, and then on the other side of the ledger are the mucks. Mucks meaning the muckety mucks, the higher up. So Chief Muck is obviously the CEO. Stuffy Muck is procurement officer. Bucky Muck is financial officer. Wizzy Muck is innovation officer, and they all kind of they're prototypical in their roles and how they interact with the superheroes.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. One of my good friends is he describes himself as a recovering CEO. So I'm going to have to see what he thinks about the character of Chief Muck. So tell me a little bit about your audience. So clearly, as you were writing this, I mean, any creative product has some audience in mind that you were hoping to appeal to. Did you have a very specific type of customer, or were you more broad?
It's broader. It's a little bit about what we were talking about before we came on air, Rita, is that I think over the last 30 months with COVID, we've all been living in a period of liminality, or in the fog, or whatever you want to call it. We had to let go of what we know, and we're not quite sure what we're grabbing onto, like a trapeze artist going through the air. And so I think the interesting thing about COVID is that we all experienced kind of a step change, pun intended here, and we're all dealing with it. And so the first thing I thought was, I think we need to reconceive of leadership. We tend to oversubscribe success to an individual leader in a particular position, and we don't think about the whole leadership system that kind of arrived at the outcome we're looking for. So when it comes to leadership, I tend to think it's about the ship, not the leader, and that in any instance, there's only one requirement for leadership, and that's that you have a follower. My dog last night, we go to the top of the road and the dog looks left and the dog looks right and goes right, and I follow the dog, right? So I think that leadership and followership are a far more dyadic relationship and more contextual than we ever give it credence to. And so the idea here was everybody has something to contribute. Everybody can be an everyday superhero. They have to find motivation, intrinsic motivation. That meaning is the new money, if you will. But if they have that motivation and they have that internal fire of discretionary effort, they will contribute to an outcome that makes a difference. And none of us is as smart as all of us today. So if we can activate that discretionary effort within the people towards a shared aspiration, then the idea here is that the firm would be better off. So the audience was anybody who's a leader, but by definition, in my definition of leadership, that could be all the way from Chief Muck down to, the janitor who told JFK, my job is to put people on the moon. I just happen to be cleaning the bathrooms, but that's part of the job.
I love that.
Yeah.
So I mean, one of the things that I have definitely observed is this, and you knew we're talking about this, which is we've gone through this step change. We know it's not going back to whatever it was before, but we're very uncertain about what comes next. And I've seen two kind of reactions. One is people freeze; they just make no decisions, and that's obviously not. You can't do that forever. And then the other one is when they finally do decide to take action, they just go all over the place. And so what I like about the book is the sequence of steps that it goes through. So tell me about the people-centered transformation framework, because I think that's something people really would be hungry to hear about.
Right. So the first observation, this, as I told you before, came from research that Brightline kind of asked me to take a look at. And the fundamental question is, why is it that the express strategy of firms, the things that they are desiring to do, right? The organizations fail to make the changes required to make that happen more than 70% of the time. So sometimes, as Roger Martin might argue, maybe it's not the right strategy. Other times it's not the right execution. And there's all kinds of different arguments for this. We don't value implementations as much as we do strategy, so on and so forth. But the fact is that the numbers are pretty bad. It's like baseball numbers. If you're batting 300 in baseball, that's good. But is it good in business? That even if you formulate a strategy and what your intention is, bold or freeze, as you're saying. And I ran into some research by Alison Reynolds, who talked about the tyranny of the tangible. And the tyranny of the tangible is, okay, we've articulated a new strategy where we want to take the business. And now what we need to do is put maybe a structural change, a procedural change, implement with technology. That's the tangible. We're reorganizing to our go-to-market, or we're implementing SAP HANA, or we're going to do some kind of new cultural process, or we're going to implement Kaizen. And so that's tangible, and you can feel it and you can see it, but it's not human. Right? It hasn't involved the people in the change, right? Peter Senge famously says, people don't resist change; they resist being changed. If you engage them in the change, and perhaps the people at the edge of the organization have a little bit of perspective that even those in the middle of the organization or at the top of the organization don't, because they're at the, if you want to use a design thinking metaphor, they're at the touch point every day. They're at the coal face every day, and they kind of have a more empathic and visceral feeling for what is and is not working with all the stakeholders, not just with customers, but all the way back through the value chain or the ecosystem or the arenas, as you call them.
Mm-hmm.
And so none of us is as smart as all of us. Maybe we need to reorient. Maybe we're over rotated on structure, process, technology. Maybe if we were to reorient a little bit more around people-centered transformation, and we were to kind of engage people more in the journey of transformation, there'd be less resistance, because now I'm part of it, which we've heard that many, many times. But then how do you codify that? How do you get down to brass tacks in doing that? That was my endeavor in trying to look at the research.
Mm-hmm. And so what would be a specific example of something that happens differently if you're using this people-centered approach?
Well, the one thing is, like, if you think about the MERB, and you think about how that the MERB is the muck immutable rule book. So in the story, right, when May is cast into a leadership role, she's kind of forced into a leadership role. They hand her the MERB, the muck immutable rule book. These are the truths that we hold self-evident about how to be a leader. And it's something like demand fail-proof plans, measure outcomes, dictate direction, require conformity, what is it? Oh, maintain control, monitor activity, those kind of things, right? The things that we talk about in traditional Taylor, and you can talk about that very linearly. I think with people, it's, first of all, the framework is nonlinear. The framework is there are 10 elements, and those elements need to be activated by very small shifts in leadership behavior. Maybe I can give you an example, right?
Yeah, that would be great.
So I'll give you an example that's true to life, right? I'm a parent, so that might mean that there's a hierarchy. So my son is currently below me in the hierarchy until he gets out and gets a job, and I say, "Hey, kid, clean up your room." Okay, I want your room clean tonight. What happens at 5 o'clock when I go into his room? It's not clean. So what's my opportunity? I can yell louder, clean up your room, or else. And I have some position power over him and coercion power over him. If you don't do that, you don't get your car on the weekend. This may be familiar to other parents. I don't know. Maybe I'm just an anomaly. Then I walk into my own room, and it looks like a disaster. And I have this epiphany that says, why on earth would my son adhere to something I'm saying? I'm demanding change behavior when I haven't demonstrated it myself. You see what I mean? So what's the shift? The shift is from demanding change behavior, from a position power or coercion power, to demonstrating change behavior. Now we go to Gandhi, right? Be the change you want to see. So all the way through, I kind of have I have smart words from leaders who have kind of articulated the essence or the principle. Then I got some of the research behind, if the leader, management by walking around, walk the talk. We know this. This is not, a lot of this research is not stuff that you and I certainly are not unfamiliar with. But it's like, how do you package it? And then how do you kind of get very prescriptive about the kinds of behavior shifts, the small shifts? This is like atomic habits or micro persuasion. What is the small thing a leader could do that would have a disproportionate impact on the outcome?
I love that.
Right? Does that make sense? So that there's a specific example where there's an element you have to activate. There's 10 elements, right? I can communicate a compelling change narrative. You need a story. This is one of the things I learned from Joseph Campbell. There needs to be a story. I need a narrative. Martin Luther King didn't say, "I have a plan." He wouldn't have created a movement, but he had a story. And when he painted that story, right, people could see themselves in that story, and that unlocked their discretionary effort to want to make that story, that articulated vision of the future come true for them, because it had meaning for them. Mm-hmm. We know this, but how are we going to actually make the right shifts as leaders to do that? We do a lot of executive education. And I can tell you, one big project I worked with an insurance company in Australia, the leader had an epiphany. The leader was over this insurance company. He was flown in after the forest fires. And when the helicopter landed and the dust settled, all the buildings are made out of wood there. So all that was left were the chimneys, and the mailbox was a metal post. And he said, as far as I could see up the road was just smoke, chimneys, and metal posts. And on the metal posts were red ribbons. That meant fatalities. Okay. And he said, at that moment, I just realized that we need to change the purpose of our company. We're not just about managing risk and recovering from the hardship of unanticipated loss, which was their prior articulation of aspiration, to we make your world a safer place.
Mm-hmm.
Now that's great and heartfelt until the shareholders start saying, you want to what? Is that going to cost money? Or the employees are going, we're worried that the whole insurance business is going to implode. So we actually literally worked with this gentleman, with people who know how to tell stories, and we brought the leadership team to that spot for him to share that story in the most authentic way. Like, this is the moment where I had my epiphany, and I'm going to be as authentic as I can with you all to see if you share in this new vision before we ever get off on the plans of how do we digitally transform this or that, or how do we, put new placards up in the hall.
Mm-hmm.
So there's an example of creating a compelling change narrative.
Mm-hmm.
Compelling means people are compelled to want to join. They find meaning in what's being said, and it's authentic.
Mm-hmm.
So there's 10 elements, and inside each element, there are 3 shifts that we kind of have to move from to, like demanding change behavior to demonstrating change behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. Well, I like that you've given people something that they can come back to that's very, very practical. Like, you can see yourself in that example.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, right? So people, I don't know, we haven't had a chance to talk about it since you read it, but it's kind of people like, oh, I'm jotting notes all over because, oh, I've been there. It may not be that you were on a manufacturing floor, but the essence of what was being said is, oh yeah, I've been in that situation before. Mm-hmm. So then when you go to the back of the book, it says, oh, make these shifts. There's something more tangible. It's not like go get a PhD in astrophysics kind of thing. It's just see if you can make these small shifts, and then, one small shift at a time, we start to activate the different elements, and then it lights up that way. So the metaphor on the PCT side is it's nonlinear, and you might activate more than one PCT, people-centered transformation element, at a different time. Embracing situational humility. Right? Embracing situational humility it's the opposite of leadership. It's kind of like the traditional leadership is, I got it, it's under control, do as I say. Well, no, now it's like we're in the fog. We're not exactly sure what's going to emerge. We need the best ideas from everybody. Nobody has a monopoly on, what exactly is going to happen. So let's find a way to integrate diversity of perspective and find a non-obvious way forward, a progression path, I call that. So that we can emerge better than when we went into this situation. And not just better for the firm in terms of profitability, but better for the people inside the organization, and hopefully better for society at large, given that we've all been through such a harrowing couple of years.
Yeah, and I think the tension around returns to shareholders, of course, has gotten very much in the news. My colleague Zainab Tan, who's at MIT, on a new book about the case for good jobs, and it has some statistics about basically the disappearance of the American middle class and this prevalence of these really awful jobs, which are nonetheless essential, upon which all of us depend: supply chain jobs, stocking jobs, healthcare jobs. And we've just gotten so out of balance. So one of the things I love about the book is it offers some paths forward to try to correct some of those imbalances, to try to really say, hey, I don't have to wait for them, whoever they are.
Right.
I can start activating things in a way wherever I am. And then it doesn't take a huge amount of money, and it doesn't take a huge amount of time, but it does take, persistent effort. And I think that's one of the big lessons from the book for me, which is, it's not like you can say, okay, 12:30 on Tuesday, I'll do these 5 things and I'm done.
Yeah.
No, you have to actually gradually make those changes. And, it kind of reminds me of every weight loss book ever, which, eat less, move more. I mean, how simple could that be? Right?
And yet, you look at the part of the healthcare stuff is the diabetes, if you will, and overconsumption. You mentioned consistent effort. One of the things that I've really built this around is Denny Organ, many years ago, back, when I was doing my doctoral work, had this concept called discretionary effort. I mean, it's not just him; lots of others have it. Discretionary effort is what you'll do because you want to, almost because you can't not. Right? You're kind of compelled to do it, not because you're told to. And so I have this hypothesis that organizations, if you think about it, right, if everybody in an organization was to do what's exactly on their job description, they'd fall off a cliff.
Oh yeah.
If we just gave an AI today, hey, just do exactly what's on the job description, we had 100,000 job descriptions inside of IBM, the place wouldn't move. It's almost like, you know what I mean? Humans animate the organization, and they do that by reading between the lines, right? This is the whole general AI problem that we have, is like there's this je ne sais quoi about being human, that we can just figure stuff out. Now, but people won't do that unless they are wanting to do it through goodwill. Hey, Rita, I want to help you out. Or because they feel very intrinsically motivated to do it. They're compelled to do it, right? Mm-hmm. So I think about organizations as reservoirs, big, huge reservoirs of untapped discretionary effort. That's there. It's just that we haven't figured out how to unlock it. And I think that meaning's the new money. At least when I with my students, I don't know what it's like for you at Columbia, but certainly, yes, of course, they're spending a lot of money to go to a place like Duke. They're learning some really good stuff, and they definitely want to get a job, and they want to pay back their loan. But they're also much more conscious about, where do I want to work, and does it align with kind of what I believe? When I went through school, I hate to say, I was like, what makes you the most money, and can I get in there? I'm 56 years old, and that was kind of my motivation. And I'm not seeing as much of that here. So meaning's the new money. So we have to find the intrinsic sources of motivation, and we're seeing this now, right? So if discretionary effort goes down on something like healthcare at this point in time, right, that's a real problem. I mean, that's a legitimate problem. We were just talking off air before, with COVID. Yes, of course, now it's going down. But there'll be other things that come along, and that's the interesting thing about a crisis. The interesting thing about a crisis is it almost is an unlock for discretionary effort. Everybody kind of pulls in, and ironically, I think what's happening now is as we're falling back. I've got a very good friend of mine who was a senior executive in a public health organization, and for the 2 years during COVID, I mean, they were in war rooms every Saturday figuring out how much vaccine do we get, who's going to get the vaccine, what will have the biggest impact. It really burned him out, to be quite honest. And he said he took some time off, and when he went back to that organization, he said they've gone back into the old mode. When I loved working with the company when we were in crisis, because everybody was they had a shared sense of meaning and aspiration, but now it's falling back into political and who knows who and how long have you been here? And he's like, I don't want to work there.
Right. Well, I think that's part of what this whole Great Resignation thing is about. The other thing that fascinates me is when you look at the hierarchical level of the people that want to come back to the office. I mean, if you're a CEO or a C-suite person, the office is a really nice place. I mean, it's got lots of room, and you have all the privacy that you need. And by the time you go down, 7 or 10 levels to somebody who's got headphones on and is trying not to be there at lunchtime because their colleagues are, microwaving fish, it's not great. Right. I think we often we just fail to understand the context in which people are operating. And I've actually heard something similar, which is, why do we do the right thing in a crisis? Why is it so good to work together? We all overcome our politics and we all cooperate, and we're passing through that now. And I think we really have some choices to make about, what do we keep? What did we learn that we want to keep? And what do we really want to let go of in terms of organizations? I know for us at Columbia, one of the things that I've observed is people are so hungry to get back to our in-person classrooms. I was unsure. I mean, I was like, okay,
me too.
We do so much remotely. Is that going to mean, people are going to say, no, I'll just do this from my bunny slippers? But no, there's this extra layer of empathy and compassion and networking and subtlety that people are just desperately hungry for. So I don't know if you've seen the same thing.
Oh, Rita, look, you're probably seeing it at Columbia too, but we've had a big wave of students come back. So students that were deferred are now coming, and so the numbers are huge. And so in the last 2 days, you'll appreciate this, I taught 6 courses. So yesterday I was in class from 8:30 till 6:15 with 2 30-minute breaks in between. They're 2 hours and 45 minutes classes. And I also managed to tweak my knee, so my knee is in bad shape. So I got home last night, and my wife. There's 2 jokes always when I leave every morning. I say to my wife, "I'm off to shape young minds." That's my thing. And then when I came back, she's like, "How are you doing?" And I said, "I'm really tired, but it's that good tired." Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not like exhausted, like I want to go kick the dog kind of tired. You know what I mean? Which sometimes if you're on Zoom fatigue, that's kind of how it feels. You got a headache, that kind of thing. Yeah. I had that pleasurable tired. The tired when you've done exec ed for 3 days or something, and you're on the plane and nobody can connect with you and you can like pick a movie to watch. It's like that good tired. That's how I feel.
Totally been there.
The energy was so positive in the class, and you can feel the curiosity of the students, and their eyes are really big, we were talking about this offline too, right? This is why we will still get on planes and go to conferences. We've done this for a couple of years. The other thing I'll say that, again, was something we're discussing off air, is I think we're all creatures of habit. So something as simple as organizing a flight to Ireland, which both of us just did recently. In the past, we'd have that done in 10 minutes on a coffee break between calls. And now it's like, oh, I have to find my passport. How difficult is that? It's almost like our own selves is asking us the question, is the drudgery worth it? We've been removed from it long enough, so we're not asking ourselves the question, do I want to work in a place that makes me have to wear headphones at lunch because I don't have the mahogany office with a nice view? You know what I mean? The pause has allowed us to ask that question. You see?
I think that's a very fair point.
Yeah.
Very fair point.
Mm.
The other thing I think that the pandemic did was it really caused us to understand what is uniquely human and what can we delegate to systems, because that human part, which was just, look, we kind of ignored it. I mean, we took it for granted. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And I'm reminded of the wonderful work done at MIT years ago by Thomas Allen, who looked at the richness of information as we have distance from each other. And what he found was, once you're located more than about 60 feet away from your co-workers, the quality of your information exchange drops like a rock. Now, the bad news is it drops like a rock. The good news is, if you're more than 60 feet apart, you might as well be on the other side of the world. So you better learn to structure that kind of engagement and interaction much more.
Crackhart had the same thing from a social network perspective, like the proximity of the office in terms of building social capital, and couldn't agree more with that. I mean, and so there is magic happens when people connect. I mean, and we all say it. We're big fans of the Drucker Forum, obviously, and why? It's the thing at the dinner, at the end, at dessert, that kind of just opens up a whole new avenue. You know what I mean? Yes, of course, the talks are good, but we all say this all the time. It's the community of people that Richard has managed to put together who have a similar sensibility about the role that business can play in the future. And you meet like-minded people, and you feel at home. I mean, that to me, that's what connects you. And we've certainly had a lot of really good conversations online, but as you and I were just saying, I'm looking forward to Vienna. I really, I'm ready for it,
So for those that are listening, this is the Drucker Forum, and the theme is around performance for this year. And so Tony will be there, I'll be there, as will a whole bunch of other luminaries. So as we're coming up to time, so just a reminder, the book is Everyday Superhero. It's about how you can actually take agency and take action in your own life, make wherever you work a better place, which I think is a good theme. So Tony, there's so much more we could talk about in terms of your activities. Where would you point people to learn more if they want to get more into Tony's world?
Look, nicely put the banner down there, complexsimple.com. That's my website. Most of the, any podcasts or talks that I've done, writing that I do. I have a thing called Scribbles, which is very interesting. I'm one of these people who always has to draw to talk if you ever have me in class. And it's very messy. I'm not very artistic. Gary's artistic, but I have a little thing on there called Scribbles, where I'm literally just trying to figure things out through Scribbles. So that would be, the place to go, complexsimple.com.
That's great. Well, I am going to be really looking forward to seeing you. It's not that long now. It's November.
No, I know. I'm looking forward to it, Rita. Really.
Well, look, thank you for sharing half an hour with us. Again, get the book, guys. It's very, very practical. It's fun. It's a business book you can actually enjoy reading. But it also has some very profound messages, I think, for those of us who are leaders and those of us grappling with whatever the next chapter holds for wherever we go. So, Tony O'Driscoll, thank you so much.
Rita, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. Thanks. Really enjoyed it.